I've been really interested in this idea of a contactless car wash filling the gaps between contact washes, and as a result of that, that means the contact washes can be spaced out a little bit more between a month or 6 weeks, something like that. So you're not doing a contact wash every week anymore. Instead, you've got a routine based on these contactless washes, and that is so good that it keeps the car pristine. You can do it once or twice a week because it's so fast. So there's just literally no dirt on the car in between those monthly washes. Some of you might have seen the 3-minute contactless routine that I did. The idea with that was that it was so fast you could do it after every drive. So it was about 3 minutes long, and it just concentrated on the lower doors and the back, and it really worked as a result of doing it after every drive. So in the winter, the dirt is still wet and it just washes straight off, and that works okay. But the reality is, if you don't get a chance to do that as soon as you come back, then it dries on the car, and then this routine isn't really beefy enough to deal with that situation. The routine that I'm looking at now is actually complete enough to not have to do it immediately after every drive. You can let the dirt dry on after a couple of days. It's not a problem. It's powerful enough to deal with it. So that contactless routine was based on using a cordless pressure washer, and the problem with those, although they're very convenient, you just grab them and go with the hose, they aren't that powerful and the flow rate isn't that high. Kind of means that you're quite close to the paint and you're just sort of dealing with about 1.5 inch contact patch each time as you're going back and forth. So it takes a reasonable amount of time to cover a whole panel. It's kind of too slow to think in terms of using one of those to do a whole car where you want to quickly do the whole car. That means what I'm basically trying to come up with is a routine that's as fast as with the cordless, but powerful enough to do the whole car. So it's based on the kind of power and flow rates that you get with a normal mains powered pressure washer. So this is only really going to work if it's just ready to use right next to where you park your car. That means I'm setting up a permanent pressure washer install in the garage and then feeding a long pressure hose out of the garage and coiling it up ready to use where I park the car. A lot of the car detailing enthusiasts like to do this where they have a permanent install in their garage, and they use a big hand reel to store that pressure hose. And I was thinking about this, but I kind of ruled it out, firstly on the basis that they're really expensive, and secondly because the diameter of these reels is pretty small, and that means you're still turning the handle a lot of times to get the hose back on the reel, and that's quite a lot of faffiness. I was thinking there's got to be a better way to deal with a long hose than a hand reel. And the other thing is, a big reel on the side of the fence there is going to look quite visible and attract a bit of attention to it. So I was thinking, what's the best way of kind of minimizing the space taken up by the hose? So you want a big loop basically, so the fewer number of coils in the hose. And then I'm thinking just hang it on the hook. But of course the problem with a coil of hose is when you come to unravel it, if you were to take the coil off, lay it on the floor and unravel it, it would kink. And that's because every time you've got a loop, there's a twist in the hose. But there's actually a magic way of coiling a hose that avoids this problem. So you do one coil that way where you twist it, and then you do the next one underneath that loop, and the next one on the top, and the next one underneath. So you're twisting it as you coil in opposite directions for each coil, and that means when you put it out, it cancels out each of its own kinks, if you see what I mean. So every next loop reverses it, so it never creates that kink. And this is just amazing. When you see this in action, you lay it on the ground and you pull it out and you walk away and you see it unravel itself with no kinks. It does just look like magic. Really fantastic little workflow. Once you get the knack of it, the over-under coiling process, it's the loops are so big, it's really, really fast to just gather that up and then you just whack it back on the hook and you're done. Because this is a contactless routine, we're not drying the car, and that means we have to use filtered pure water for the final rinse off. So once we've pressure hosed the car, we're going to use de-ionized filtered water for that final rinse. Now, the first version of this that I came up with, I actually set up the valves so that I could switch the pressure hose from normal water to de-ionized water, but I backpedaled on that and ruled it out because the amount of water in the hose itself at the end of the wash was pretty significant, something like 7 litres or something for my length of hose, and that means that's all being wasted the next time. And de-ionized water is quite expensive per litre, so it's something you really want to look after and conserve as much as possible. Which means we do have to be thinking in terms of another hose that's dedicated for the rinse stage, and that's okay. So we're doing the same process. We have a long big coil of normal hose coming from the de-ionized filter, and that's what we use for the final rinse, and that's got its own little head which is designed just for that low volume of water. So the last thing I want is kids coming up to this and turning the hose on the driveway and messing around. So what I want to do is actually have all of this set up using my smart home system, using HomeKit and Siri, which means I don't have to go in through any gates or anything, turn on any taps or switches or anything like that. I can have the power and the water controllable from my watch. So obviously the power is the easy one. We just use a little smart socket that connects to HomeKit, and that allows you to turn off the pressure hose power. And I'll link to these in the description below. There's one that I use, which I'm really pleased about. It just works, plug and play, no trouble at all. But to get the water under Siri control is a little bit more complicated. Now, there are smart taps that people use for sprinklers and things like that, but they're quite expensive. And like I said, in the original version of this, I was actually having a setup where I switched between normal water and de-ionized water, which meant I needed 2 valves, and I just didn't want to spend that kind of money on this. So I looked at a cheaper alternative, and you can get these solenoid valves. Again, I'll link to these in the description. And they basically open when you give them 12 volts, and they shut when there's no power. So it's actually pretty straightforward to hook these up to Siri. So obviously we start with a smart socket, and then we use just a 12-volt power adapter, cut the end off for the tip, so you've got your two terminals, and you connect that to the solenoid valve. And that means you can then use the smart socket to basically open and close your hose, which is just fantastic. So I have my inlet hose that goes into a splitter, and then one half goes into my de-ionizing water filter. That then goes onto the rinse hose, and then the other half of that splitter goes into the pressure washer, which of course comes out through the pressure hose with a trigger on the end. And just after the 3-way splitter, I've got these smart solenoid valves controlling the water flow through those. So obviously I can turn it all off, close both of those valves, and turn the power off to the pressure hose. And then when I want just the pressure hose, I open just that valve. So I can control this whole system from my phone or my Apple Watch, just using the HomeKit scenes. So I've got a scene for pressure hose, which obviously turns on the power for the hose and opens that valve for the water. And then I've got another one for the de-ionized rinse, which turns the power off for the pressure hose, turns the water off for the pressure hose, and then turns the filter water on. So all of this means that the whole system's kind of pretty inert when it's not in use. There's just a coil hanging on my fence, and if anyone wants to try and turn it on, nothing's going to happen. And the ends of those hoses go under my garage door to the system. So it's kind of jammed in there. You'd have to cut it to do anything silly with it. So the worst case scenario, someone wants to steal the end of my hose, they'd have to chop through it. I just don't think that there's much of a risk there. So let's go through the whole routine step by step. So first of all, we're going to use a snow foam on the car. Now this is the key to making this work. So the snow foam is the thing that actually makes the dirt lift off the surface. If it's been dried on over a couple of days, just the pressure rinse alone isn't enough to dislodge that dirt. The snow foam is the magic that makes this work. So we use the foam lance, and we take the quick disconnect nozzle off from the previous wash, switch it back to the foam lance, and we walk around the car with the foam. So this is the first time we're using the pressure hose in the routine. So we take the coil off the hook, lay it on the floor, and just walk away and watch that magic unkinking process happen as you walk around the car. So in the summer, if you've got bugs on the front of the car, I actually spray on a little bit of this diluted power clean, and that will dissolve those bugs. So foam goes on over the top of that, and then you pressure rinse the whole lot off. In the winter, you just go straight on with the foam. That's all you need to do. And then you just basically spray the car, and that's an extremely fast process. If you get the angle right, you can cover a great section of the car in one sweep. And then you switch from the foam lance to the pressure rinse nozzle, and you power wash it all off. Give it a moment or two to dwell. If you're starting back where you started with the foam, you're maximizing the dwell time for that foam as you move around the car in the same kind of pattern. So working from the top down to make sure we're kind of moving all of the dirt down and off the car. So now that the car's basically clean, we can't leave this water to dry because it will leave marks on the car. So we need to replace all of that water with de-ionized filtered water. So on our phone or watch, we enable the other scene, which turns off the pressure hose and turns on the filtered water. And then we just do the same thing with the rinse hose, walk away, watch it magically unkink, and rinse it off, again working from top down. And this is the process where you'll learn the best way of doing it for your particular car, because every car is going to hold on to water in slightly different ways, in different areas. You'll need to just concentrate your rinse water a little bit more in various places. Again, we start from the top and work our way down just to maximize that sort of pushing the water off and down all the time. What I find works really well for this on a panel is basically if you move left to right really quite quickly, you can kind of create a sheet of water that just moves straight down the panel. Really fast routine, actually. So now we do the magic coiling up process. So we just basically create one loop, twisting the hose one way, and then we do the same with twisting the hose the other way, and that loop will go under the loop you've just made. And you carry on alternating like that until you've coiled the hose up. And you want to make them quite generous long loops, so you're not doing too many of these, and then you just chuck it back on your hook and you're done. Now, one thing I like to do, I think it's probably beneficial for the longevity of the pressure washer, just make sure you turn everything off with your Siri HomeKit scene. That cuts the power to the pressure washer and closes both of the water valves. Then just squeeze the trigger on the pressure hose to let the pressure out of the machine there. So you're not wasting any of that DI water that remains in the rinse hose. It's fine, just leave that in there. You turn the trigger head off for that, coil it up in the same way, pop it on top of the other hose on the hook, and you're done. The only thing that you need to do kind of ahead of time or in preparation for the next wash is just refill your foam lance. Of course, you can kind of do that. You can fit that in anytime you're in the garage or whatever. Just make sure that's ready for the next time you want to do a wash. Now, I've done a little bit of research on the best filter to use for this de-ionizing water filter stage, and there's a company called Raceglaze that sells these specifically for washing cars. Normally these kinds of things are aimed at window cleaners and things like that, and they're a different shape. Basically, the most common kind are these stumpy ones, and they're wide and they're short, and so they don't fall over in the back of a window cleaner's van. But Raceglaze have done a load of research and actually figured out that the taller, thinner shape of these is much more efficient. It uses less resin, because obviously you need to replace the resin in these as it goes through. They've got a fixed life. It will only sort of purify so much water in its lifespan. And these taller shape ones, they've worked out, are much more efficient, and you don't need to replace the resin in those as often. So yeah, they're a little bit more expensive than these window cleaning ones, but that should pay for itself in the amount you'll save in changing the resin. So it's really interesting what they've discovered, and the litres and all the rest of it that they've published on the website. Definitely recommend you check that out and consider that kind. They're not sponsoring this video or anything. I bought one of these. They are quite expensive, but I think it creates this unbelievable routine. Once you've got de-ionizing water filter in your car wash routine, you never have to think about drying your car from these quick contactless routines, and that just changes the game. Now, the reason this whole contactless system does work so well is because I am reapplying the sealant every month in the contact wash. And there's a couple of different formats I think that you could look at for this. I'm currently still using the optimum no rinse method that I detail in another video. So I do that, and then I use the OptiSeal as a drying aid, and that's the part that puts that sort of sealant onto the paint and allows the contactless wash to really shed the dirt off. So my parents actually have a different routine. They're using a hard wax that lasts a year. They only do that once a year, and then they're replenishing that sealant with Gyeon Bathe Plus on their monthly contact washes. And there's another new routine that I'm keen to try, which is based on the Bilt Hamber touchless system. So Bilt Hamber touch on and Bilt Hamber touchless. A different kind of snow foam, I think, the idea being that it leaves less suds, so it's easier to rinse off in a contactless routine. And then their product touch on, which is a bucket, sachet based bucket wash, which reapplies that sealant protection and has incredible hydrophobic properties. So once I run out of the OptiSeal, I'm going to move to that routine and try that. So there are a few different contact routines you can look at there, but the idea is that you're replenishing that hydrophobic self-cleaning sealant on the car to make sure these contactless washes work as they should, and that is that the car looks absolutely fantastic after every one of these contactless washes. You will see it build up until you're ready for your next contact wash, especially on the windscreen. You may want to just clean the windscreen a little bit more every 2 or 3 weeks, something like that, before your full contact wash, before you think that full contact wash is necessary for the paint. But generally speaking, you're left with a really gleaming car after these contactless routines. It's absolutely fantastic to have this all set up. I know it's quite an expensive little setup, but it's there now. It can be used for other things. You know, the pressure hose is available for the driveway and other tasks. It's just brilliant to have this all ready to go and set up. When friends come to stay, you can offer to just give them your contactless routine. Everyone's kind of quite happy with that. And it's such a good routine. I have set my parents up with the exact same setup, and they love it as well. So for them to be pleased, you know, it's brilliant. If you don't want to allow a lot of time for washing a car, but you still enjoy having a clean car, maybe you're spending the sort of £5 or £10 every few weeks getting it cleaned in town or whatever, that money could be put to a system like this, and you know you're not damaging the car. So let me know if you've got any comments or questions on this routine below, or if you're doing something similar or different. Please do like, comment, share and subscribe to help others find this video and support the channel. That's much appreciated, and I'll see you in the next video.